I think choosing to buy an electric guitar is a lot like choosing a friend. It's not the most straightforward process, and it does require a little bit of a leap of faith, but there are certain qualifiers that will really help narrow down whether or not you're making the right decision. I pretty much built a career on showing people how to not make the same mistakes that I made, both in my journey of playing guitar and in acquiring them. So in this video, I'm gonna show you the things I wish I had known before buying electric guitars. And this applies to both your first electric guitar or your 50th. So let's get right into it. The first thing that I wish I had known was how to match the guitar with the sound I hear in my head. So when you're inspired to buy a guitar, generally that inspiration comes from somewhere. It could be from watching or listening to your favorite guitar players or your favorite records. Either way, it plants an idea in your head on what kind of sound appeals to you the most. So what you can do with that information is find out what guitars were used to bring about that very sound that inspired you. For example, you're a big Hendrix or Stevie Ray Vaughan fan. Obviously, the Stratocaster is responsible for that sound, and that's more or less the topology of guitar that you're going to want to aim for. Or on the other hand, if you're a big fan of Slash or Paul Kossoff, you're going to think more in terms of a Les Paul. That's just to help you narrow things down, right? So if you're a big fan of how a Stratocaster sounds, you're probably not going to be very fulfilled in achieving that sound if you were to go for buying a Les Paul. The second thing I wish I had known before buying an electric guitar is understanding the effect of scale length. This is a big one because it directly impacts your guitar playing experience. So the two main benchmarks of scale length are Fender scale length and Gibson scale length. And in a nutshell, Fender scale length is longer and Gibson scale length is shorter. Now what that means is, let's say you put a set of 10 gauge strings tuned to standard tuning, right? On the Fender scale length, it's longer, right? So it's gonna pull the strings even harder. They're gonna be a little bit more taut, a little bit stiffer. Whereas with Gibson scale length, that same set of strings are gonna actually feel a lot looser because the scale length is shorter. Personally, I love both because I own both Fender scale length guitars and Gibson scale length guitars. This guitar, for example, is my number one. This is my baby. This is old soul. And it kind of, aesthetically, it's a little bit of a mixture, right? It's got the telly shape, but it essentially plays like a good Les Paul. It's very burst-like. It's got the double humbuckers, a set neck, Gibson scale length. This guitar is excellent, and this really would be the guitar I reach for in a house fire. And the scale length is perfect. I tend to use 10 to 48 gauge strings, and they feel great. I can bend, but at the same time, there's enough tension to where I'm not over bending. The intonation feels good. I just really like that scale length. But then again, I own Fender guitars as well that have the Fender scale length, and I do kind of play them a little bit differently. I tend to play harder on Fender scale length guitars because they're stiffer and because they fight back a little bit, which I like, especially if it's a Strat. I'm okay with a Strat just kind of fighting you a little bit. A Les Paul or Les Paul style guitar, on the other hand, I like it to play itself. So in my experience, I would say that if you like to really go heavy-handed with a guitar, Fender scale length might be more in your wheelhouse. Whereas if you want a guitar to essentially just play like complete butter, play itself, bend easy, all that stuff, Gibson scale length might be more for you. The next thing I wish I'd learned is the importance of resonance. I'm talking about when you're picking up an electric guitar for the first time, before you even plug it into an amp, you just play unplugged a nice big chord and just listen to it ring out. I first learned about doing this from an interview with Gary Moore, where he said the first thing he does when he picks up a guitar, before he plugs it in, is he just plays one chord, listens to it ring, and that pretty much tells him whether or not he's got a live one. Now, I don't profess to be anywhere near the greatness of Gary Moore as a guitar player, but I did resonate. Let's see what I did there. I did resonate with what he said because it makes sense to me. I think a guitar that resonates well is kind of a hallmark of just a well-built instrument. Take, for example, Old Soul here. I mean, listen to this. Just rings, man. I mean, that rings almost as loud as my 335 does. If you play an electric guitar acoustically and it resonates just like that, you can pretty much rest assured that when you do plug it in, it's gonna sound incredible and it's gonna give you tons of sustain. Oh, and by the way, if you're getting value out of this video, do me a favor, hit that like button and consider subscribing to our YouTube channel if you haven't already. It'll really help us out and it'll keep you in the know of all the new lessons we got coming out. The next thing I wish I knew when it comes to buying electric guitars, and I think this is a very important one, is to not get too caught up in the brand. Now, I understand that brand names carry a lot of weight, and of course, there's the quality to back it up for the most part. But the reality is, a good guitar is a good guitar. It doesn't matter if it's top of the line brand or budget brand. I like to use the great Jack Pearson as an example of a guitar player that plays budget guitars and makes them sound world class. I mean, he prefers Squier Stratocasters, and he makes them sound incredible, better than any custom shop I've ever heard. You want something that'll bring out the best in you, and if you connect with an instrument that isn't particularly prestigious, that doesn't matter. You know, a good guitar is a good guitar. This is, of course, especially important if you're able to play the guitar before buying it. Now, when you're purchasing something sight unseen, which, carries its own risks, generally, brand name tends to be a little bit more important, because if you're not actually able to play it before you buy it, you kind of buy it at your own risk. So when you're at your local guitar shop trying out guitars, don't shy away from the budget brands, because you never know, you might stumble upon a winner. And finally, the last thing that I wish I'd known before buying an electric guitar, and this is more of a recent thing that I've learned because I've sort of gotten the vintage bug, in the last 5 years. So I've been scouring the marketplace for old guitars, and living in Nashville, you're around a lot of them, and so you get exposed to the magic that vintage guitars are pretty awesome. But what I wish I had known before buying my first vintage guitar is that old doesn't automatically mean good. There's some vintage guitars that live up to the hype, that just have that magic about them, and there are others that are just total lemons. I say if you want to get into the market of buying vintage guitars, it's very important that you play them first. The first vintage guitar I ever bought, I didn't even get a chance to play it. It was an impulse purchase. I was just really excited to, join the club of owning an old instrument, right? But when it arrived and I picked it up and started playing it, I was very underwhelmed. And it was disappointing because I had spent a decent amount of money. But thankfully, I was able to sell it to someone who wanted to just hold on to it and flip it later. And I was able to eventually work my way into getting some decent playing vintage guitars. And I have a few in my collection now. But it was that first very costly mistake I made in the beginning that taught me the very important lesson that just because it's old doesn't automatically make it good. So those are the things I'd wish I'd learned before buying electric guitars. I've made several costly mistakes in order to learn those things, but the purpose of this video was to share it with you so that you don't have to make the same mistakes I did. What if I told you there's a way to eliminate mistakes when it comes to improvising guitar solos? If that sounds like something you're interested in, then I invite you to check this out. It is a free lesson on how to instantly solo in any key. This is going to get right into the nitty-gritty on improvising guitar solos, making the right choices, and being able to comfortably play in every musical key that there is. Sounds amazing, right? Because it is. And it's yours free. All you got to do is click here to claim your copy, or check the link that I left for you in the description box. When it comes to buying guitars, you want to match yourself up with something that's going to bring out the best in your playing.